The afternoon is ending, but we still have exciting conversations to go and an amazing keynote who has just arrived that follows us up. So we're going to have an exciting, quick conversation. The pace is moving fast, as you all have seen. I think these are the fastest conversations the United Nations has ever seen, but we're setting an example, right? We're setting a global example. I'm Marco Davis. I'm excited to have this session talking about allyship. You know, in 1966, Martin Luther King sent a telegram to Cesar Chavez. How many folks here are familiar with, show of hands, are familiar with Dr. Martin Luther King? Raise your hand. All right, keep your hand up if you're familiar with Fannie Lou Hamer. Fewer hands. So you now have your homework cut out for you. Please Google Fannie Lou Hamer after the session today. In 1966, Dr. Martin Luther King sent a telegram to Cesar Chavez, who with the unparalleled Dolores Huerta was organizing the United Farm Workers. And in the telegram he said, our separate struggles are really one. A struggle for freedom, for dignity, and for humanity. There's a lot more in that telegram that I suggest you read, but it gets to the heart of the idea of allyship. A famous quote from Martin Luther King is, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. But the lesser-known figure I mentioned a few moments ago, I thought put it more simply, and for me, more eloquently, and that is the incomparable Fannie Lou Hamer, civil rights activist from Mississippi, who said, nobody's free until everybody's free. That's why I said Google Fannie Lou Hamer. Many more pearls of wisdom she has. So we're going to start with our panel here and ask each of you, maybe by way of opening remarks, to tell us, what does it mean to be an ally to you? How do you come to this concept of allyship, and how does it show up in your work? We can start with you, Jerika.
Thank you, Marco.
Yeah, it's on.
Okay. Thank you for that, and thank you for quoting Dr. Martin Luther King. I mean, I think he has absolutely been a uniter, as has Cesar Chavez and others, and Fannie Lou Hamer. And so how I come to this space and how I think about allyship is that it's about action. So often we can look around and we can empathize with another community. We can feel conflicted or upset or sad at something that they may have experienced, whatever tragedy it may be. But empathy is just not enough. And to quote Dr. King, I'd say the same thing. He often says, in the end, we will not remember the words of our enemies, but we'll remember the silence of our friends. And so to me, that's powerful. It's not enough to empathize or feel bad. It's really, allyship requires us to speak up and to speak out and to reach out to other communities when we see that there is harm that has been done or wrong that has been made or an injustice. So that's how I see allyship. It's actually moving and acting. It's not just using words.
Great. Monica.
Hi, everyone. I could not agree more with you. I think you said that so well. Oh,
there it is.
There we go. There we go. Hi, hola. I would add to what you're saying. I was thinking about it earlier, and I thought, 4 things for me, like be aware of what's going on in your community, in other communities, what's coming, the battles that are coming, and the battles are coming for all of us, whether it's critical race theory, transgender people, the LGBTQ community, immigrants. We are all going to be used, I fear, as political pawns in the next few years, more and more. So be aware of what's coming. Be awake about it. Be awake of what's not true, right? Look at the studies and the research and realize that the things you're hearing are stereotypes, they're falsehoods, they're being used to divide us a lot of times. Be a proud ally. The LGBTQ community needs the Latina community, very much so. And the Latina community has been there for the LGBTQ community, which I'm so thankful for. So I would say to everyone in this room, please keep being an ally. Be aware, be awake, be a proud ally, and be loud. As somebody said earlier, Dr. Andrade quoting J-Lo perhaps, or J-Lo quoting him. Be loud, right? Be loud, talk about it. Say, I'm an ally to the LGBTQ community. I'm an ally to the Latino community. And I think that's how we all move forward together.
Well, good afternoon. First, I just want to say how grateful I am to be here. Claudia, thank you. Claudia said this morning that we're not here just to talk, but to be educated so we can take action. And as a head of a school, I feel really inspired by everything that I've heard today and the opportunity to be a part of this education, and then to go back to my school and examine our actions and think, how can we improve upon what we're doing? And so I'm very grateful. Marco, I think at the most basic level, being an ally for me is one way that I seek to have purpose and meaning in my life. I really think that's what it's all about. I attended Exeter. You mentioned Martin Luther King. I enrolled as a financial aid student just a few months after Martin Luther King's assassination, and it completely changed my life to attend this school that ordinarily I would have thought beyond the possibilities for my family. And so as principal now, I'm really trying to do the same for others and to make sure that all of our students at our school, and our mission is to unite goodness and knowledge and inspire youth from every quarter to lead purposeful lives. And the phrase youth from every quarter is in our deed of gift, which was actually written in 1781, which is when the school was founded. So what I'm trying to do as principal, as an ally in a way, is to be an ally before people feel we need allies. I want all our students to have a strong sense of belonging and equal opportunity to thrive wherever they're coming from, and to learn from each other. And through that process, leave our school ready to go out into the world, prepared to learn and engage across differences and grow together. So it's just one important way for me personally to have meaning in my life.
Good afternoon, everyone. And Claudia, thank you for the opportunity to be with the team today. Marco, from an allyship or an ally to me, it's simply about being there. It's showing up. It's showing up in the dark and in the light. A lot of times when folks show up, it's after something big has happened. It's when all the lights are on and everybody's looking. Wow, this is probably going to be a little bit too frank. But when folks show up in those moments, while I'm glad they're there, it feels selfish to me. For me, it's about showing up when no one's looking. That's when allyship is there. And I think I'd end with allyship for me is about standing by, standing with, and standing up for those who can't do it for themselves in that various pick the day. So that's what I was about.
Thank you for that. Very, very well said. So let's talk about what allyship looks like in practice, right? What is it actually, how does it play out? How does allyship show up in your lives or in your work? And so here we can go in any order, anybody who wants to jump in. What might be an example of allyship or a best practice that either you've practiced yourselves or that you've seen in your spaces that can help us all sort of learn both to observe good allyship and to practice it?
I can talk a little bit about storytelling. That's not loud enough. Okay. So one of the things I've seen that's really wonderful is when non-LGBTQ people share their stories, right? Around marriage equality, we really needed that. We needed mamá, papá, la abuela, el tío to say, I want Moni to get married to whoever she loves, right? And so because, numerically, too, we need the people who are not LGBTQ to speak up for us, because although 20% of young Latinos of Gen Z say that they are LGBTQ, that's a really high number. Still, we definitely need our allies to help us out and to share our values and to talk about how they are shared values, right? Because a lot of times what happens is when people try to divide us, they try to, stereotype us and give us a whole lie about us, essentially. Like I said earlier, a lot of lies are being told about LGBTQ people to win elections, honestly, in Florida, in Texas, and it's really unfair and cruel, and it leads to violence. So a big part of it is sharing your story. I appreciate my own parents sharing their stories whenever possible. They don't have a lot of choice. I do media work, so it's like, come on, let's go. And they got good at it. At first, they were like, oh, I don't know about this. And then they got pretty good at it. And so I really appreciate that when people share their stories and talk about why the values of a community that maybe isn't exactly like them is still important to them. It's a shared value.
That's great. Thank you. Yeah. Anybody else want to share?
Earlier, there was a comment made about this notion of, I think it was JC's talked about if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. And I think that statement is very, very accurate. And so from an allyship perspective, in terms of how does that show up, if the person's at the table but they don't have a voice, create the space. It's as simple as saying, Juan, I think you had a point to make. I talked to you earlier. It was a great point. Would you mind sharing? Right? It's literally just creating the space for others to have some support, to have some sponsorship and allyship in that moment. And also it creates an opportunity for the individual to get some confidence to say what they want and need to say. But allyship it's not that difficult. It's literally just creating the space for others. Said differently, it's about being selfless each and every day.
So I would just add, in our school environment, and there's been a lot of emphasis today on action, which of course is critical, but words do matter. And we have a very powerful DEI vision statement, and it is enormously helpful to me as principal because it is my guide, and I can point to this. And it's a long statement. It's a full page, 3 paragraphs, and I invite you to look at it. But at a high level, what is really important is it recognizes that our commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion is inseparable from our vision of what it means to be an excellent school. We cannot be an excellent school. We cannot live up to our own ambition and our own values without a full-throated commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion. So words do matter, and then you can turn to action. But I always have that vision statement to go back to when people need to understand what we're trying to do in terms of the composition of our student body, the composition of our faculty, the composition of our trustees, why our curriculum needs to evolve to be more inclusive, and so on. That vision statement, those words, provide a very powerful foundation for the actions that we then are able to take.
Great, thank you. There you go.
Thank you. And so for me, I think I just look at it from a personal perspective. Oftentimes, we are all in positions of power, and we have the opportunity to empower others and the opportunity to open doors for others. In my experience, my very first job in corporate America, right after high school, quite frankly, that job, that space that was given and opened up to me came from a Latina executive who was in a space where she was the only executive of color. And she was very intentional about creating opportunities and opening doors for other people that looked like her and many that did not look like her. And so there are often times where we might be in a position of power or we may be the token. But I think it's important for us not to be comfortable with just being there and representing our community and being a token, being one. For me, I really think true power is to be able to open doors for many. And so when we are all at the table and we're all in a position to work together, I think that's the diverse workplace. That's the cultural space that I know I want to be in. And I think it's one that we should all strive for. So if given the opportunity, open doors for someone else that may not look like you, because it'll make for a richer experience for us all.
Well said, well said. Thank you. And now I think you've each shared great insights, great perspectives, and of course, obviously this being the Hispanic Leadership Summit, we're interested, I suspect, in this conversation being around allyship from other communities joining in our movement, right, in our effort. How can other communities join this movement? How can we reach out and engage other communities to have them stand by us, to speak up for us when we're not in the room, as we've heard through countless statistics throughout today, that there's far too many times when we're not in the room and there may be other individuals and other communities represented in the room that we need to be supporting us and to be advocating for us. And so thank you for the examples and for the commitment you all are demonstrating. I want to flip that question for a quick second and ask you all, what things do you think the Hispanic, Latino, Latinx community can do for your efforts, for your communities, for the causes that you believe in? How can we, as a Hispanic community, be better allies to your work? Any thoughts or examples?
Well, I'll start with that one. In many ways, I work at the National Urban League, one of the nation's largest and oldest historic civil rights organizations, and we were created and designed to really support African Americans that were fleeing the KKK and Jim Crow, and really just a lack of opportunities and prejudice in the South. And so many of them migrated to the North and the West, really seeking a better opportunity, and they found quite often that they were experiencing some of the same challenges, and it was not the promised land that they thought it would be. Fast forward to today. In many spaces and places, our movement has grown, and while we do service African Americans and folks that are of members of the African diaspora, it's grown, and so we have many folks in our communities that are Latinx, many of them that identify as Black and Hispanic, and what we've found is working together on any host of issues. When we're talking about do Black Lives Matter, the first calls we got were from so many of our allies in the civil rights community. We work very closely with Unidos US and President Morial, who I work for at the National Urban League, and President Murguia. They're very, very close. And it's oftentimes that they will pick up the phone and say, how can I help and support? And so I will say, I think I've seen the allyship and have experienced it. And I think we have seen it and experienced it and also shown up as an ally in many spaces and places. So when we're talking about immigration, or we're talking about children in cages at the border, if we're talking about mass shootings, all of our communities have experienced it. And so I will say I have seen it and seen the importance of showing up. But I think the most important part is to recognize that we have a shared struggle. We have a shared responsibility. We have all been through colonialism, servitude, slavery, oppression in one way, shape, or form. And so I'm just thankful for those who have worked and fought with me on any host of issues, and I'm thankful for the opportunity to do the same with them.
Well said. Anybody else want to jump in? Or should I go on to the next question?
Do I have to press this to get it? Okay. I would just say that not quite half our students are on financial aid, slightly more than half are students of color, and 9% identify as Hispanic. We bring voices to campus on a regular basis so they can see examples of people who've come before them. And there may be opportunities here for us to partner, for Exeter to partner with people in this room. But we want them to have belief. I talk to them a lot about having belief. And so we want them to see examples of those who have came before them and have found their way and made a difference in the world and found their own way to lead purposeful lives. So we do this, and you may have ideas, and I'm very happy to hear your ideas. But that's part of what we do, is bring voices to school on a fairly regular basis so people can see through those examples why they should have belief in themselves. And it really doesn't matter what background, and then we look for opportunities for internships. And for those who come from backgrounds where that's less privilege baked into their family circumstance, it's really important for us to create those internships. And I may leave here with new opportunities for new internships for some of our Hispanic students, and that would be a great development.
Great, thank you. And I want to, something you mentioned, Bill, actually made me think of, I want to push on a point that I heard Jerika just make, which is, I think, important to recognize and to bring into this conversation, which is this idea of intersectionality, right? We are sometimes not only Hispanic, but like myself, we are both Hispanic and Black. We have other identities that are often part that make up our reality and our perspective, and that's often potentially a useful starting point or a bridge in which to both be allies to others and to bring in other communities to be allies to our community. So I wonder if folks have any thoughts on that dynamic, and the ways in which that shows up in work and how that can be beneficial to our community.
Sure, I'm happy to give some examples of that. It's incredibly important to recognize our intersectionality, our connectedness, right? I like the word connected a little bit more myself. But like, for example, at GLAAD, we were part of the Drop the I Word campaign, the word illegal, right? It was being used by media all the time, and it was being used to vilify immigrants. And so it was important for us to be part of that because we learned about language through our work at GLAAD, too, and how people are vilified using certain language. You make them other. And they seem like bicho raro, right? Like, oh, this community is. So illegal was used that way, right? And so we were part of that. And I think that was really, really important. And we've been part of course, uplifting the work of Latina and Latino and Latina organizations doing voter civic engagement in this last midterm. A lot of what we did was reached out to Voto Latino and so many, Mi Familia Vota and Mi Gente and so many, and said, how can we help? How can we support your work? Let us uplift what you're doing so that people in the LGBTQ community too realize, hey, Latina people, you're going to see a lot of lies about Latinos, and people are going to read the tea leaves about how we voted and how we didn't vote. This is what you need to look at and know how to be a good ally to the Latina community, right? So it's important, of course, it goes both ways.
Yeah, from an intersectionality perspective, that intersectionality piece is when and it was mentioned earlier today about this notion of mental health. There's a lot that goes into this whole notion of intersectionality and mental health. It's almost as if there's multiple challenges in that. Well, I'll just speak personally. So my wife is white. And so my boys, they're not white enough, they're not black enough, right? So my son is like, Dad, and I just learned this. He's in his mid-20s now. He said, Dad, I said, kind of how are things going, man? He said, Dad, it's going well. He said, but there's one thing I notice about he identifies as black, about our community. He says, Dad, when I'm with you and we're walking down the street, I get the nod. When I'm not with you, I don't get the nod, right? And that's what's up? How you doing? What's going on? He doesn't get that. So I say that to say, when we run into intersectionality, I would argue that the degree of difficulty for life gets exorbitantly more difficult. And so our communities who have experienced underrepresentation, marginalization, and those kinds of things, I would argue that it's exponentially harder when there's intersectionality. So our communities, be it the black community, be it the Latino community, our job in my mind is to help support all of those. In fact, put our arms more around those where there is intersectionality. There's racism in the Latino community around colorism. It's a thing, right? But how we wrap our arms around and how we be an ally and show up in those moments matters too. But I would just say it's the degree of difficulty is exorbitantly harder when there is intersectionality, and the more we understand that, the more I think we can help others make it more successfully through this life.
Thank you for that. Yeah. And it's super critical, I think, to keep that in mind, especially in this day and age, right? Tomorrow's Latina Equal Pay Day, so there's rampant sexism in our society and within our community, right? We know that there is racism throughout society and within our Latino community. There is homophobia in society and within our community. There is rising anti-Semitism in society and within our community. So we need to make sure to leverage these intersections and to make sure to actually build this united front that we want to build. Now, we're moving fast. I know we don't have a lot of time. I might be able to get two final questions in. One in particular, I want to do, even though we're moving fast and we're only going to scratch the surface, I think it's also important to keep it real. Allyship doesn't always work well. Folks don't always show up as good allies, and we've talked about best practices. You all are phenomenal examples and role models of allyship and the thought and the care that you've taken, and being here shows your investment in this part of your community and or other communities. But what are some pitfalls? What are some challenges? What are some barriers that still remain to allyship that we need to also think about and overcome if we're actually going to achieve this kind of unity and collaboration that we want?
All right. That's a tough one, but certainly when words aren't followed by action, trust is eroded, and trust lost is not easily regained. In our setting, I think in the school setting, it's just terribly important that we be willing to think of ourselves as learners and not feel that we already have to be perfect, particularly as principal or as a faculty member. And I try to express to the faculty that I'm a learner, to give other people a license to be learners, because if you're a learner, then you can make a mistake and not be canceled or not be judged. And it's terribly important, I feel, that we have to have the grace to treat others as learners. So when it doesn't work is when we're afraid to be learners, or afraid to admit that we're still learning or growing, or afraid to make a mistake and then retreat, and don't have the courage to take some chances. That is damaging, because it's not understood. It can appear as indifference or complicity or whatever. So I think when we're afraid, or when we feel a burden to already be perfect, whether as an institution or as an individual. And so I do try to model, and I don't try to go out and make mistakes on purpose, but I try to model that I'm learning as much as the next person, so to give other people room to be learners as well. And that'd be a good show of hands. Who's a learner, right? Are we all learners? Certainly I am. So,
Thank you, Bill. Anybody else? Go ahead, James, and then Monica, maybe. Saw you reach first.
Sure, I'll be brief. Allyship can go bad when the ally assumes that they are either a part of the community and overstates the understanding of what the community and or the person is. And I've had a recent example where an individual in the interest of being an ally was very, very assertive in their support of this individual. So much so that the question to the individual was, so is this what you're looking for? And they said no. So there's the risk that in the interest of being an ally, the person oversteps.
Yeah, in Spanish we would say se pasan. they overstep, right? Monica?
Well, you all brought up such good points that make me think I want to add to that. That's a really good point. Asking, how can I help? Just asking, not thinking, I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that, I'm going to do the other for you. Because, people want to be allies, but then you get like a list of things, assumptions about the community. You have to kind of go, nope, not that, nope, not necessarily, nope. And, it's better to be a listener and a learner, as you said. I think that's fantastic. And I think for the LGBTQ community, I get a lot, I try to get media, I say, don't be afraid to cover this, please. I know you're worried about misgendering, or you don't understand necessarily what it means to be transgender or what it means for someone to be non-binary, but let's talk it through. Let's help get educated. So, and that's something we tell allies too, who are in corporations or the companies that GLAAD works with to get people more comfortable with LGBTQ issues. We say, it's okay, and if you screw up, just say, I'm so sorry, I didn't get that right. We've all done it, even those of us who are in the community. So be, open to saying, whoops, I made a mistake. I'm going to try really hard not to do that again. And not stop yourself from covering, if Spanish language media or English language media, stop themselves from covering LGBTQ issues because they're afraid to screw up,
I would just add that I think humility is important. So oftentimes we're leaders in our own spaces and places and communities, and we just feel that leadership should spill over into whatever challenge or issue or thing that might be happening. But I think having the courage to step back, and as my colleagues here said, to listen, to start with asking, how can I help? What do you need? Asking a clarifying question if you don't understand, and recognizing that this is a continued learning process. Taking a course in history or African American history or history of Latin America and the Caribbean just does not necessarily qualify you to be an expert. It's a starting point, but we have to recognize that we are all human and that this is a lifetime of learning and being okay with not necessarily having to be the leader and the person executing the strategy. It's okay to step back and also follow and learn. And so that's how we grow. That's how we grow externally, but also internally within our communities.
And so as we get ready to close, I want to move from words to deeds. I want to move to action. I want to issue a challenge or maybe a request to each of our panelists. And I want to ask you to share with this audience, how can you and or the institutions and organizations you work with better be allies to our community? What are the things either that you can do, or perhaps how can folks here in this audience and from our community look to you and your organizations? What can they look to you and your organizations for in terms of help and allyship to support them? So maybe that might be a useful way for you each to close in terms of what practical things for next steps. How do we follow up this conversation? Anyone want to start?
Sure, I can start. I think I alluded to it earlier, but I think being, out there right away when somebody says something about the Latino community that's inaccurate or wrong, the LGBTQ community needs to be out there right away saying, no, this is what our friends are telling, this is what the Latino community is saying about itself, and that's wrong, correcting the record, and just being a loud ally to the Latino community is a huge part of it. And, part of that, I can't help it, I work in media. We have to watch shows with Latinas in it and tweet about them and, hashtag representation matters. We have to support the shows, any kind of artwork that is Latino, LGBTQ, Black. We have to support and be loud, pushy broads. I like to say I like to be a pushy broad for equality on social media, right? Use your own media and get out there. So anyway, that's the end of my commercial. Thank you very much.
Let me see, if you'll indulge me for just a moment. These are words from the days: scarcity, intentionality, sponsorship, mentorship. Maria said, I only want to put my capital on the person who's proven something. Collaboration, unify our efforts, Julieta said. Know your banker before you need the money. Mark said, trust is foundational. Debbie Salas Lopez, trust requires action and transparency, Richard talked about. All of those words require something called, from my perspective, art. And that's authentic relationships that lead to trust. All those words lead to that. So what we focus on at YUM is this whole notion of how do we build authentic relationships that lead to trust within our communities, cross-culturally. So for us this year, we did something called RISE, Refresh, Inspire, Spark, and Engage, where we brought together our Hispanic, Latino, and our African-American folks together in D.C., and Claudia and Marco actually helped us. We're part of this event where we brought these communities together to have them have an experience just for them, by them. I said them like I'm not Black. For us, by us, and all the words. And Dr. Robert Rodriguez was with us as well. But we brought this community together so we could unify, so we could come together, so we could have a common goal, so we could support each other. And that was with the leaders, director level and above. Just last month, we did something called Mid-Rise, where we took our junior folks and did the same thing at the junior level. And so now our RISE organization, our RISE attendees, are going to now support our Mid-Rise attendees going forward, both Hispanic, Latino, and African American. And so we're excited about that. But the whole goal of doing so is to help us build authentic relationships that lead to trust. Let me end with, we also do something called reverse mentorship, where we have senior leaders reverse mentored by junior folks that are different than they are. And the responsibility of the senior leader is to do nothing but to learn about the individual that they're being mentored by. Why? Because if I get to know you and we build an authentic relationship that leads to trust, then we can turn it from art to arts, authentic relationships that lead to trust, that leads to sponsorship.
Fabulous.
That gets us
So, Bill and Jerika, final words?
I said earlier that 9% of our students identify as Latinx or Hispanic or Latina. One of my top priorities as principal was to raise sufficient funds so that we could admit students without regard to a family's ability to pay, and we've done that. And so now I want to go out and build awareness of the opportunity at Exeter for families that might not think about it. But in particular, I want to build awareness in the Hispanic community so that 9% grows. I'd also like to, and I've been very public in saying, that we have a commitment to increase the diversity of our faculty and increase the diversity of our leadership. So in all three areas, Claudia, if I come back next year, you invite me back, or the year after, I hope to report that representation has grown. I think that will be an important part of our school becoming a stronger, better school.
And Jerika.
I guess my ask really would be, and this is also what I offer, is to never stop working together in coalition, not just when there's big issues, because we know there's so many issues that are always bubbling under the surface, but it is focusing on the continued development of relationships, continuing to unite around so many issues. And I'll say the core one is protecting our democracy and making sure that everybody has a voice and has the opportunity to be heard. And so one of the things that I've been very engaged in partnerships with other organizations. We did this in 2020. We launched a campaign called Reclaim Our Vote. And we worked in coalition with Latinx organizations as well as Asian and Pacific Islander organizations, as the National Congress of American Indians, but we just worked in coalition. And I don't want us to just do it when we're talking about election cycles or we're talking about state laws that may limit people's access to the ballot box. I want us to do it continually. I really want to continue working to build a culture of civic engagement and a culture of coalition building. We just have to continue building over and over and over again, and not allowing bias that lives in all of our communities, prejudice that lives in all of our communities, colorism, all of those things to divide us. So that's my ask, and that's also my offer.
So, thank you. So quickly, just to close, I want to thank each of you not only for the work that you're doing to bring about more fairness and equity and justice in society, but also for the allyship you've already shown and will continue to show to our community. And we'll close with, I'm a big fan of quotes, a reminder, as I said, nobody's free till everybody's free, or as another famous saying in our community goes, en la unión está la fuerza. Thank you very much.
Thank you so very much. Thank you for allyship will be key. If we want to succeed, and we will succeed, allyship will be key.